Hello and welcome to this session outlined the future of work, where we will be exploring how organisations embrace a blend of virtual and face-to-face communications, collaboration and events. I'm Tim Freeman, Business Excellence and Lead Manager at Taylor Woodrow, and I'll be moderating the session. I'm really delighted to be joined by Hannah Essex, who's Co-Executive Director of British Chamber of Commerce, and Holly Marriott, founder of 1804. Holly, if I can come to you first, it is beginning to feel as though we're entering a 21st century industrial revolution. What are the trends in the future of work that you see emerging? What are your predictions for 2021 and how the world of work will change?
Hi, yes, so thank you for having me. So we've been doing some research for the past 5 or 6 months now, and one of the key trends that we're seeing is around how businesses start to attract different types of diversity. So we're looking at neurodiversity and chronic illness specifically as something that's becoming more relevant. People are starting to become more aware of attracting people who identify as neurodiverse, who perhaps might have been unable to engage with roles in a traditional way. And we're starting to think about how those people might bring skill sets that weren't previously accessible to businesses. So we have done a survey of several hundred people, and of those, about 11% said that they had a chronic illness, for instance, and that 50% of those people would be unable to work if they were made to work in a classic setting. So we're starting to think about how we can help people to engage with work differently, and also thinking about education, so bringing in awareness of the future of work and potential future jobs earlier on in education, so in primary level. You know, I'm talking about where the world of work might move and what future jobs might start to appear that no one's even really thought of yet.
Well, that's great. Hannah, what are your thoughts on this question?
So I'm a job sharer, so I've been a big champion of flexible working for a long time, and I think people of every age and stage want some increased flexibility in their work. So whether you're somebody who wants to study on, as well as work, or whether you have caring responsibilities, looking after elderly parents, or if you're nearing retirement, wanting to have a more flexible way of working is something that lots of people have been looking for. And from a business perspective, we know there's been a gap between the skills that businesses need and the skills that they can find. And so by taking a more flexible approach and broadening the pool of talent available, I firmly believe that businesses can find more people to help them to be successful. And what we've seen with this pandemic is that it's kind of turbocharged the move towards flexible working, with lots of people working remotely and adapting to working from home very quickly. And in some organisations that have previously been quite resistant to it, and they found it to be not only productive, but in some cases more productive. There's been a lot of debate about what needs to happen next. There's this big drive to get people back into our cities, and there's absolutely a challenge around the economic damage of everybody suddenly withdrawing into their home offices rather than their city-based offices. But I think we're going to go through a period now of businesses trying to get to grips with what the new normal needs to look like for them. We need to get really much more clarity around things like public transport. We need to get kids settled back into schools and childcare settings for working parents to be able to re-engage in the workplace in the way that they may have done previously. But I think what we'll end up with for a lot of businesses is a balance where there is some office-based working, and then there is some more working from home and more flexibility, and less emphasis on where and more emphasis hopefully on outputs and outcomes.
I think I'd agree with you. I think COVID has offered the opportunity to challenge some of the blockers that a lot of organisations were struggling with over the past number of years. And power has almost been given to the employees to say that working from home can be done. We have proved that in the last number of months. But there also, I think, power has also been given to the employees about embedding IT systems that previously may have been hit blockers but we've always done it like this. But now the employers can now say, well, look, we've just shown that actually change is good and it does deliver the outcomes we require. So I guess with that in mind, Hannah, how can businesses better prepare for the future of work and become more efficient and progressive in their processes?
I think the first stage is a mindset shift. So it's moving from that kind of traditional idea of physical presence, 9 to 5 at a desk, as being the most productive way of doing things, and more of a emphasis on those outcomes, like what do we need to achieve here, and what contribution is everyone making to that, and then giving people the freedom and the trust to then deliver their contribution in the best way that works for them, where they can also balance it with other things going on in their lives. And so I think you start with that, and also then invest in management. You know, if you need to set really clear expectations to be able to take a really flexible approach. Everyone needs to know what they're doing, what they're driving towards, and then the managers need to know how they deal with that, how they manage flexibly and remotely, and how you deal with poor performance when someone's not physically sat next to you all the time. So it's taking that kind of organisational wide culture change and really embedding that in what you do.
That's great. And Holly, did you have anything to add on that point?
Yeah, I mean, very similarly, I think we should really be encouraging people to think more creatively, and just inside, you know, less traditional structures in terms of work and delivery. We do a lot of work around task deconstruction, looking at traditional job roles and breaking them down into the components that actually, you know, make those deliveries happen. And then thinking about putting them back together, accelerating processes, trying to really reduce inefficiencies. And I think it's very much, you know, a culture of thinking about people in terms of 9-to-5 roles. But I think being able to work flexibly and engage with work in different ways is going to change how people actually think about how they deliver the work, the timeframes that they deliver work in. And again, as Hannah mentioned, things like dependencies, you know, if people have young children or if they care for a parent, perhaps, you know, it allows the flexibility to be able to work that into your life and not have to let your career suffer as a consequence.
That's really interesting. I think I think COVID also provides an opportunity to review some of the processes, and like you both said, remove some of the waste from those processes if that's possible, make those processes visible. I guess from a personal view, I think tech can be used as an enabler, but I think we do need to create clear boundaries and accountability for what is expected of the employee to help track in productivity. So Holly, if I can come to you on the next question, how will blended ways of working support this new world of work, and how do you embed that successfully?
Sure. So I've worked remotely for a long time, about 7 years now, and I think there's very much a line between sort of the contractor and the employee. And I think what is very important is to think really from a business perspective as to, you know, just because a contractor is someone that you don't think of as necessarily a permanent part of the team, you should be able to make them feel embedded. You know, they should be loyalty around how you think about the people that are involved in delivering any of your work. So I think there's consistency in how you encourage people to engage with your community. Thinking about, you know, the rules of engagement and the flexibility that you allow people to have, and whether that's something that is different for people no matter how they're engaged contractually, and really just making sure that people feel, you know, as invested as possible in moving forward as a team, rather than it being sort of a barrier between people to delivery and you know, impartiality around these things.
That's great. Hannah, did you have some thoughts on this point?
Yeah, I think it's really important to kind of set the rules of engagement. So if you're going to have more remote agile working, when are the times when you maybe do need to come together? When are the times when you might need that kind of face-to-face opportunity, and setting that expectation from the start. And I think often when we talk about flexible working, we sort of default to talking about offices where full remote working is possible, but there's organisations where that's not possible, and there's organisations where you have a mix of both. So when you have those, take a hotel, for example, some staff who absolutely have to be there because they're delivering a frontline service, and others who could work remotely, how do you make sure that that doesn't become a division within the staff team, so that the frontline staff feel like they don't get that kind of flexibility? The home working staff may feel like they're missing out on some kind of element of the workplace. So I think consciously thinking about those things and thinking about how do you create a team spirit, how do you create those water cooler moments that happen naturally when you're physically all in the same place, and create them virtually if you need to. And that's happened a lot during the pandemic. You know, people have been setting up just coffee break chats with colleagues to keep connected. People have been doing social things, quizzes and online drinks and things. So how do you make sure that you consciously think about those things that naturally happen in a physical environment but need to be created when you take on a more virtual way of working?
I think that's great. I think you both definitely talked around the ideas of communication, and that communication may be less in an informal way. So, and highlighting the importance of a community feel. Perhaps there needs to be some form of strategy built around that, maybe depending on the organisation. So I guess with that in mind, Hannah, how do we invest in building an inclusive community within a business, and where do you start when it comes to changing the culture?
Well, culture change always has to come from the top. So you set kind of an expectation of what your culture is going to be, and it has to be lived by everyone from the CEO downwards. And you have to be true to that, and you have to be open to hearing the feedback of where you're getting that right and where you're not getting that right, and really think about how you improve it. It's quite often people can invest up front in terms of culture and values, and then they just get filed away as something that they've done rather than something that they live. So it's important to keep that alive. And to have champions within the organisation who will hold you to that and hold you to account for how you actually behave. In terms of how you then live that, you have to look at your entire employee life cycle. So how do you raise awareness in your local community that you're an employer that's open to talent of all kinds and different ways of working? How do you advertise? What do you say in your job descriptions about what you're looking for? Is there any language that you're using that is people are self-ruling, ruling themselves out because they don't think that the way that they want to work is going to fit with that organisation? So it's taking that right through from your PR and how you present yourself as a business externally, through your recruitment cycle, progression, management, and so on. So it's making sure that you have it embedded throughout, rather than perhaps sometimes tokenistic efforts which are well intended but don't have that kind of sustainability that taking that more holistic approach can have.
Okay, great. Holly, what were your thoughts on this?
Yeah, very similarly. I mean, in terms of creating culture, I think it's not just about, thinking about what you want to project, but also how to attract the right people, and, thinking about, in terms of millennials and Generation Z, having very different values to prior generations. So sustainability, company ethos, company values, thinking about what those people that you want to attract are interested in, making sure that your company aligns with those things, that you're projecting the things that are attractive to people that you want to bring into the business, making sure that it feels inclusive, that you've got diversity that isn't just there on show because you feel you should show diversity, that you actually care about bringing in different people, that you want to make sure that you cover things like neurodiversity, and chronic illness that we were talking about earlier, that you're looking at, wellness and how you provide for people, and mental health side of things, especially around remote working has come to the fore so much lately, and really talking about that and putting yourself forward as a business in terms of how you engage with it will be something that, people are very attracted to and will be able to see as they look for roles.
I think it's an interesting question in itself, and I think that it provides the opportunity to change the, potentially a new business model or a new approach. And Hannah, you mentioned it's got to start from the top down, and I agree. I think that when we look at culture, you can look at culture perhaps in a soft and a hard culture. The hard being the more written strategies, the values, the structures, the procedures. And once you've got that in place, then the softer culture can then help feed through the way that people perceive things or their beliefs, the unwritten rules, how people actually go out and carry out their business. And that is when you see the real culture change. And I think that is something that takes a lot of time, but is also enabled from having harder cultural structure in place. I think the big thing with when you're not working in the same office environment is trust, and having that element of trust between employee and manager to carry out their work without being micromanaged, which there is a potential to do so in this new environment, I feel.
Tim, can I just completely agree with you? And I think the risk is that, businesses are going through an incredibly tough time at the moment. This is the worst economic conditions we've seen in anyone's lifetime. And the risk is that things like culture and in sort of investing the time that you need to kind of embed culture and make it real, could be one of those things that gets pushed to the sideline. But there's such a huge benefit to getting it right, and the productivity you then get out of your people by making the environment as you have said it is going to be, you know, living up to your expectations that you've set. There's a huge business benefit to that. So, you know, while it might seem like a kind of nice to have, it's actually fundamental to business success.
I couldn't agree more. Holly, did you have anything else to add on that point?
No, I completely agree, and I think it's just thinking about how you can reframe, you know, the conversation to make sure that you are covering all bases really, and make sure that the community is something that you get regular feedback from, to make sure that people do feel included and that you're checking in to make sure that people do feel invested in what you're building.
I think a closing point from that point for myself would be also leading by example. I think if you're going to put these strategies and procedures in place from top down, then they've really got to be lived and breathed from top down in order to get it fully embedded within the organization. And the senior leadership do need to believe in what they're depicting the organization to be like. Holly, how do people engage? How do you keep people engaged in a growing workforce in a changing age? How do we know what is important to people and what will attract and excite the right talent for the business?
I think there's a variety of things, but as we touched on, you know, ethos and values, I think those things are very important to project. And I think that's something that will automatically start to bring the right type of people to you as a business. I mean, personally as a business, we're invested very much in loyalty as a conversation, and having been a contractor for a long time and also managing a large team of freelancers, one of the things that we hear the most is that, you know, someone's been brought in on a project, they've maybe been in it for a year, but they still don't necessarily feel a part of the team because they're not employed. And I think it's very important, if you do have people that are delivering projects, no matter what length it, you do feel, you know, that you can project that they are just as equal as internal employees. I think that's very important to people. And we're moving very much into a world at the moment where I think there will be actually more contracting, rather than people taking the risk of employing long-term. People will be engaging, you know, for short-term contracts. And it's very important that those workers feel invested, that they feel that they are a part of what they're, you know, delivering. And I think, you know, things like knowledge retention, it all feeds into very much a long-term conversation. Having someone as a contractor, for instance, rather than an employee, there's a classic sort of assumption really that they're not as loyal, they're not as interested, they'll move on very quickly, but it's actually the reverse. I think you can be very easily tempted away into you know, a perm role that pays a lot more, whereas as a contractor you have flexibility. You'll be with the client for a long time and it might sort of come in and out. And I think changing how you think about working with those people is going to be a huge thing in terms of attracting, you know, the right people to deliver your projects in an agile fashion as we move into this strange future that we're heading into.
When we discussed this previously, you also mentioned the importance of the employees being happy as well, and I thought that was quite a nice point.
Yeah, absolutely. I think it's so important to really make sure that people feel, you know, engaged in what they're doing, and, you know, for culture of the business itself is sustainability, allowing, you know, remote workers options and opportunities to work in the way that they choose. It's, I think if somebody works remotely, whether it's a deliverable, you know, sort of 9 to 5, things don't necessarily need to be so rigid. And I think people having that ability to care for dependents, you know, to be able to live and work where they choose to live. Our research has said that a lot of people are thinking about moving settlement type, essentially, so from an urban to suburban or suburban to rural. And I think as people start to do that, they will reconnect with family networks, you know, with friendship networks, that in turn feeds into, you know, their personal wellness, their, you know, their mental health. Having those networks there is all an additional support for them.
That's great. Thank you very much. Hannah, I know you've got some thoughts on this point too.
Yeah, I think there's lots of different elements to keeping people engaged. I think, primarily making sure people have clear purpose. There's that really famous story about, I think was it President Kennedy who went to NASA and met the janitor and said, "What are you doing here?" And he said, "I'm trying to put a man on the moon." And there's that kind of real investment in the purpose of the company, whatever your role and whatever your contribution is, that you understand what you're building up to, what your bit does to the greater outcome. So purpose is really important. There's plenty of research out there about what people are looking for out of work, but certainly flexibility and balance is one of those key things. So being clear about what that looks like in your company, and then living up to that is really important. I think when it comes to the kind of the fun stuff, the reward and recognition bit, the kind of more social side to it, I guess, is thinking about diversity in that. So if you do have people working remotely, how do you make sure that everyone is included? If you have working parents or people who have cultural or religious considerations, that Friday night drink after work is not necessarily the way to build team spirit and to keep people engaged. So just thinking about different ways that you can do things to build that camaraderie and that sense of purpose and team spirit. Management, we've talked about already, is so important. People don't leave jobs, they leave managers. So making sure that you're investing in training and developing your managers so that they know how to support people so they can be their best. And then investing in training and development, so making sure that people have a sense of that, that if they want to progress, that they're supported to do that, even if that means them eventually leaving the company. I think people leaving well is better than people staying and being miserable. So thinking about individuals and what they want from life and how you can best support them to get there.
I definitely agree with a number of the points you've raised there, and I think investing in managers is going to be one of the big ones. I think in enabling this new change. I feel that constant goals and objection review and tracking is going to be a challenge, but also one that's going to be quite exciting, especially for the new managers. And I think regular feedback is crucial to providing this engagement and keeping people's engagement in the organizations. I think one way you can track engagement potentially is through engagement surveys, but again, the right questions need to be asked to give the answers that are going to provide that improvement and that change for the future.
And sorry, you have to act on those engagement surveys. So if you ask people how they're feeling about things, you have to then demonstrate that you're doing something about it. Like, just doing the survey isn't enough. You have to actually do something in response to it.
I agree. Thanks, Hannah. So Hannah, staying with you then, what do organisations need to be doing to make sure people are equipped with the right skills and behaviours to work flexibly?
So I think, pre-pandemic, there was a lot of mystery and mystique around flexible working, and a lot of people were quite resistant to it. And how on earth can we make that work? And I think we've sort of proved that it's actually not that difficult. Lots of people have adapted really quickly to remote working. So as long as you've got the right technology and people have what they need to be comfortable in their working environment, then a lot of it is about actually just setting those rules of engagement that we talked about, like when is it a video conference, when is it a phone call, and maybe trying to set some boundaries about that so people are kind of clear about what that looks like. Are there set hours where you all do need to be online and available, and how far does that flex go, and being really clear about that so that everyone knows the environment within which they're operating. But in terms of skills and behaviours, I think a lot of that is already there, where there does need to be training, particularly on the sort of tech and how do you make best use of technology, particularly on sort of managing remotely. Again, it comes back to management. Then I think that that's just making sure that that's all in place, and you think consciously about the change that you're going through and how you're asking people to adapt. And I think it's important to make sure that as people are working flexibly, those things that might have come up more naturally in a kind of physical environment, so things like building networks, building connections, learning from people in different organisations. If you don't just bump into them at a meeting or an event, then those are the kind of things you have to be more proactive about providing opportunities for, and also making sure that you continue to invest in training and development, not just about how to do things remotely, but to make sure that people continue to be engaged and don't just feel that they're just sort of out of sight, out of mind. So I think there's lots to do, but I don't think the leap to a more flexible approach is as dramatic as some may have thought previously.
That's brilliant. Lots of good stuff in there. And Holly, I don't know if you had anything to add on that.
Yeah, I mean, I very much agree. I think people were very resistant traditionally to remote working and to flexible working. And clearly it's been proven it's possible. It might not be ideal for everyone, which I think is the key point to make, really. Lots of people that have struggled, you know, people that are in shared spaces, people that are in flats or apartments where they don't have the room to be able to sit comfortably. There's a huge thing around ergonomics and, you know, are you comfortable? Are you at a desk? And I think the huge percentage of people in the research that we're doing sit on a sofa, you know, or a bed. And that's fine for a few hours, but after a while it can be very uncomfortable and you can end up doing yourself more damage than you anticipated. So it's thinking about how you can be comfortable, how you can be in a place that makes you feel productive and able to work to the best of your ability. And also remote tools, you know, it's not just Zoom. I think everyone does think that, and there is so much more out there that people can engage with. A lot of them are free. You know, there's a lot of great tools that people just don't know exist. And I think a lot of the resistance really around remote working is, I don't know how to do this because I need, you know, a physical person, I need a whiteboard, I need post-its. There's so much that you can do, you know, without having those physical things. And, you know, I think thinking about the environmental impact of that, you know, you don't need to commute to an office. Your business does not need to pay for an office space. There don't need to be any of those, you know, carbon overheads that people think are absolutely needed. And that's, you know, traditionally been the assumption. I think hopefully we'll move towards more co-working, you know, more flexible hubs, and rather than it just being a very sort of classic, this is an office space, we might have a couple of remote workers, it will be much more blended. There will be a lot more people doing it. It will be much more understood. And instead of it being a thing that is almost a negative, oh, you're working from home, we know you're not doing anything, which is the way people often think of it, it really will be, that's great for you, you know, you'll have a more productive day, which is often the case. I think finally on that for me is for people to understand working remotely in COVID is not the same as working remotely normally. It's nothing like it. You know, it's quite an unpleasant experience. If you have children, I can imagine it's very challenging. There's no break. You can't go anywhere. Certainly when we were more locked down, you couldn't go for walks, you couldn't see your friends for coffee. It's absolutely nothing like working remotely normally. So for those people who think it's been a horrific experience, it's not always exactly like this. There is some hope to doing it, and it can be a nice way to live your life.
That's great. I think this question is a great question. It helps summarize and brings the conversation to a close point, really. I think we've raised the fact that matrices are going to be a key one in terms of who are you, what do you do, what do you need to provide the tools for the particular people to carry out their job. We understand there's no one size fits all. I think it's critical for organisations to understand the home working environment, and that needs to be considered. Not all people have an office setup at home. We all agree that recognition for output rather than desk time, output over hours, is a key point for organisations to understand. And what happens to those conversations around the watering hole, as Hannah said, that are going to get lost? How do we include that community feel into an environment when people aren't necessarily going into an office? Tech investment has been made, and there are some great collaborative tools out there, free. We trial a number through our organisation, and they all have their USPs. Some are not going to work for everybody. It depends on what that organisation is after, but a trial is definitely the way to go and see what works for your different organisation. Trust is the big word that we've mentioned a number of times throughout the conversation, and that the relationship between the manager and the employee. How do we track performance and training in this new world of flexible working? How do we all enable that change? I think one thing we haven't spoken about, perhaps enough, but the environmental impact of the lack of the travel and those side of things is also a key one that we've mentioned throughout the conversation, but may not have been picked up. So organisations listening into this panel, then, what can they do next? Holly, I'll come to you as you're on screen. What can our organisations do next?
Yeah, well, we're actually still running a survey, 2 surveys actually. We'd love to get more results coming through. We're running an individual study which has got basically people filling in their response to remote work, thinking about the impacts that are, you know, foreseen and unforeseen in terms of how we engage with remote work, what the future of that side of working might be. And we're also doing a study for HR leaders, which might be specifically useful to people in this panel. And really it's thinking about how businesses are starting to frame how they move forward in the environment that we're in. We would really love it if people were interested in engaging. The links are on our website. And if anyone wants to have a chat about anything in terms of, you know, the study that we're doing, the results, they're going to be coming out very soon. So we'll be feeding those out to people.
That's brilliant. Thanks, Holly. And Hannah, anything you'd like to end on?
Yeah, I think you said that there's no one size fits all, but there's certainly people out there who have tried things and learned from them. So you're not on your own. You know, we've got 53 chambers of commerce that cover the length and breadth of the UK, and that's a great place to start if you're looking for a bit of advice or for finding other companies that are like yours that have gone through this process already, and connecting with your peers to learn what others have learned. So what works well, what are the things you need to watch out for. So no one's starting from a blank sheet of paper here. There's loads out there already about how you can adapt to a more flexible, innovative way of working. And so get out there and connect with others and learn from others. Well,
I'd really like to thank both of the panelists, Hannah Essex, Co-Executive Director, British Chamber of Commerce, and Holly Marriott, founder of 1804, for your time today. It's been a really interesting conversation and hope you've enjoyed it. Thank you.
Welcome to Flexpo Business. I'm Madeline Cole, the founder of the Flexpo event series. In this session, we look at the future of work, embracing a blend of virtual and face-to-face communications and collaboration. COVID-19 forced the global working population to work remotely and flexibly, with the overwhelming majority of people now reporting that they value forms of blended working. What does the future of work look like? And how can flexible working work on the front line in different roles? And how does a reduced hours model have an impact on an organisation? I'm joined today by two fantastic speakers. Hi, Claire. Claire is the Programme Director of Timewise.
Hi there. So yeah, my name's Claire Campbell. I've been with Timewise about 4 years. We're a small social enterprise business, very much mission focused on unlocking flexibility. So way before COVID, we've been working to help employers get better at flexible working, pilot and trial, and innovate new ways of designing their services to enable people to work less. By background, I'm a work psychologist, and I was in an in-house HR roles for a number of years before joining Timewise after my own experience, both as a kind of professional woman, a mentor to other professional women trying to make things work, and just somebody who's always enjoyed and had an interest in the future of work.
Thank you very much, Claire. I don't think you are a small organisation. I think you have a great voice and most people have heard of you, so you're not doing yourself justice. I'm also joined by Charlotte Lockhart, who is the founder of the 4-Day Week. Hi, Charlotte.
Hi. So I'm Charlotte Lockhart. So we have 4-Day Week Global. It's run by Andrew Barnes and myself, and you've probably heard the very successful trial that Andrew and I ran in our company in New Zealand, Perpetual Guardian. We introduced a 4-day week into our business some 2.5 years ago now. And since then, we've been talking to businesses around the world about how they might look at a reduced hour, productivity focused workplace, which of course has become all the more important in the during and post COVID world. So we've had lots of exciting conversations during lockdown and subsequently, but I'm looking forward to sharing some of that advice with you.
Thank you very much, Charlotte. So we've got a great mixture here of different skill sets and backgrounds. So really looking forward to this discussion. Thank you both for joining us, and thank you all for watching. I'm also joined by Ursula Tavender, our head of content here at Flexpo, who I will hand over to kick off the conversation.
Thanks, Maddy, and huge thanks to you both for being here today. I'm really, like you, really looking forward to what I'm sure is going to be an amazing conversation. So to kick off, I think Claire, this one's for you. What we find is that companies can often be paralysed when it comes to offering different opportunities for people to work flexibly, because they can't offer the same thing to everyone because of different functions and different types of roles. So particularly relevant when some roles are frontline and some are office based. So how do you start? Where do you start when looking to design roles in different ways across diverse business units? And what examples can you share about how companies can embrace flexibility on the front line?
Yeah, I think you're right. We've come across organisations who've said, because we can't send some of our staff to remote work, we just won't offer it for anyone. I think we start from the other place. Let's look at what is possible and what types of flexibility can you offer, and what will help people ultimately achieve a sense of greater control and choice about their working patterns, which is what people who want flexible working want. They want that feeling they've got control, they've got choice, and they can think about when they're going to work most productively. So yes, I think we need to start by understanding all the ways people can work flexibly. And we talk about the when, where, and the how much. So you can flex where someone works. Obviously, at the moment, for a lot of us, that's remote working, but it could be out of other offices, out of other sites, out of cafes, wherever. You can flex when someone works. So that's people who work full time, but maybe flex their finish time, start time, do it compressed hours, different ways of working their hours. And finally, the how much. So are there options within your organisation for people who want to work less and work reduced hours? So where we start with organisations is understanding all the different ways to work flexibly and looking, as we said, to see what is possible. So what can you offer? It doesn't have to look the same for all groups. You can make a commitment to all staff to improve access to flexible working, but the framework and the solutions that you can offer to different staff groups have got to be fit for the team they're in, the service they're delivering. So one size in this case definitely isn't necessarily the right answer, but you can show the commitment to all staff groups. So what can that look like? As a couple of examples, I remember a knitwear factory that we work with, very much a family business, wanted to grow a sense of supporting people through their long careers in this organisation, and so the flex framework there was about having choices of shifts, having improved kind of options for extended leave, parental leave, and so on. So you obviously, it's factory, you can't work from home, but we can give you choice of shifts. We can help you through different life stages, find the pattern that works for you, take time off when you need to. So the flexibility they could offer, really reflected the culture and the ethos that they were trying to create. Another example would be in nursing, where again, they have to be there, and in fact they have to be there at a certain time. So there's no flex on when someone starts, there's no flex on where they work, but can you offer a choice of shifts? Can you actually give individuals better options and control over when they're working and how much they're working? So we've been trialing things like team-based rostering and self-rostering in nursing. So apps that give people, again, that feeling they've got a bit of input, they've got a bit of choice, they've got a bit of control over their hours of work. So those are just some examples, but how do you take flexible working into frontline? I think by finding ways that you can offer individuals a feeling that they've got choice, they've got say, they've got control over their hours of work.
I think that makes a huge difference, doesn't it? That sense of involvement and engagement in the process, even if it's not, even if the answers aren't ultimately what people need them to be or want them to be specifically around their personalised working pattern. One thing that I talk a lot about with the companies that I work with is actually development into a role that perhaps does reflect your personal needs if the current role doesn't, being part of the approach to flexible working. So it's not always possible to meet everybody's needs, but we can, as a responsible organisation, live our values and develop our people so that they can develop and acquire the skills to go elsewhere into a role that does offer the flexibility if we can't meet their needs right now and in that specific way. So and
I think it's just showing, isn't it? So it's just showing willing to meet someone part way. And actually I find individuals, when you're justifying why a certain pattern won't work based on the business need, individuals generally understand. They're realistic. It's still got to work for the organisation. It isn't just about giving somebody what they need. It's got to be that win-win for both sides.
it's always about that compromise, isn't it? And I think it's always about also being creative and working together. And that kind of leads me on really nicely to a question for Charlotte, which is around the benefits of a 4-day week. So I think so many more people are considering a 4-day week and looking at it as a really viable solution to get things moving again, particularly if a business has been really hard hit through the experience of COVID. So Charlotte, can you tell us about, what the benefits are of a 4-day week and how you start if this is something that you're considering as a business?
Yeah, so first and foremost, it's a bit of a misnomer calling it a 4-day week. I mean, I know we do, but that's how the story started, and it's certainly what the book's called. But actually, really, what we're talking about is reduced hours working, and what we're accepting is that productivity in the UK, the research all shows that productivity is less than 3 hours a day. And so it's actually when you think of that and you understand that was at the heart of what we was experimenting with at Perpetual Guardian, is if productivity is that low, what are the triggers that we can do to increase productivity? And if we can increase productivity in the day, can we then give our staff time off? And therefore, what are the triggers that will make that do that? Now, if you think about it, in an organization, when the CEO says to you, hey guys, I want you to be more productive, staff hear two things. They go on, you want me to do more with less, and there are redundancies on the way. And we're actually not about that. We're actually about paying as much as you earn full time, but you working less time. So it's full pay. But you can't have full pay if the company loses productivity. That the workplaces, as you were just discussing with flexible working, it's a two-way street. The business still needs to do what it does and make the money that it does, and we need them to do that, particularly now because tax paid to cover the cost of all of the things that we as a generous society decide that we want to pay for. And so it is a two-way street. And so when we were looking at this, when we handed it over to the staff and we said, look, we don't even know how to measure your productivity. And that's question number one that often comes up. When we talk to people, is how would I measure productivity? Well, if you think about it, that's actually quite concerning. You can't measure productivity now. Mm-hmm. So this is actually, at its heart, the worst thing that this is actually a way in which you develop productivity measures for your business. And that's your worst thing that you will get out of it. By going down this method, but down the process of working through what your productivity is, how you can do it in less time, and then how people can work less hours. And it's a collaborative approach that is bottom up established. So we gave our staff the ability to choose how to run their reduced hour work model. And the reason for doing that is that my 4-day week or my reduced hours and what I need isn't going to look like what you need. And what works in my business won't necessarily work in your business. And so what we're looking at is how do we find a way to increase productivity and reduce hours. And so therefore you end up with all sorts of lovely conversations being had. We have our IT team is a classic example. So the head of IT leaves early so he can see his children at the end of the day. He works 5 days though, because he found as a team leader, it was too hard for him to not work 5 days. One of his staff works 5 days, but walks his daughter to school every morning and comes in at 10. Another staff member takes a whole day off, and then there are other staff members that take 2 half days. Now, in your heads, you'll be going, God, that sounds like a nightmare. But when you ask them about it, they say, look, it was a little bit of a little bit of getting used to at the beginning. But one of the guys says, but it just literally does not come up now. Because what you're doing is you're actually allowing your business, and it's the same as what Claire was talking about, people being able to choose their shifts and things like that. You're allowing your business to get a sense and its own pulse in terms of how a team needs it to work. You empower them to do it. I mean, you look at the likes of Gap, who put in one of the apps that Claire's talking about, where you can adjust your shifts. You've got a whole pile of students basically working for you who don't want to do one shift or another, and they were able to swap shifts, and their profitability went up by 10%. And that's because people were working when it was right for them. And so then when they're there, they're so much more engaged in selling you another pair of jeans. And the same thing happens in nursing. It's interesting that Claire brought that up. The same thing happens in nursing. There are a number of care homes that use this model, and they use a reduced hour work model, but there are conditions around it. You can only have the reduced hour work thing if you don't call in sick. And this is, of course, in the States is the way that one works. And of course, the rest of us more civilized world aren't quite so snippy about sick leave. But what the care home was finding was that people, if they didn't want to come to work, they just called in sick. And then the care home's then having to get in a temp staff member who costs probably 1.5, if not 2 times what their standard staff member costs. And so the economics of encouraging your staff to be present at work when they're needed at work actually works better for the business. And when businesses understand that, it's not just about how can you produce more widgets for me, but actually how does employing you cost me less?
I mean,
so it's a...
Sorry, Charlotte, carry on.
So it's a collaboration, and so what we say with the reduced hour work model, and it's also the same with flexibility, is just try it, give it a go. The number of companies, and Claire, you probably got this as well, the number of companies that I've spoken to have said, oh, I would, before COVID, I had never had any remote working, I was very anti it, and now they're like, oh, this is actually really interesting for my business, and I've really enjoyed the flexibility. I've really enjoyed the ability to reduce my office costs because I haven't got a whole pile of people in the office. My electricity bill's gone down. So there are real economic benefits for business to do it this way, but they're getting over that hurdle of the fear of it being the right. Adam Grant tells there are 3 reasons why businesses don't do it: lack of trust, and fear, and management just basically just not being prepared to put in the work. But once you've got through that, Claire, you must find this as well. Once management have got through that hurdle, there's often no going back.
Charlotte, I have an operational question for you, if I may. The companies that adopt a 4-day week across the board, is it typically the same 4 days, as in they would all have a Friday off? Or okay, so it's different for each.
Yeah. So again, the business has to choose what is the model that's going to work for it. And so we have retail. Our business has retail offices, so we have to be open all of the time. And that was one of the conditions for our staff was we're going to try a 4-day week. We've ended up just on a standard reduced hour model instead, but we can't close the office doors. So you guys are going to have to work out how we can keep the business open. We've got 16 branches throughout New Zealand. We've got 250 staff. You guys have to work out how we can keep the customers happy. Other businesses, and so then you get all the benefits of the staff taking the time off that best suits them. But other businesses do close for a whole day, and that's what's right for them. And when you talk to the owners of some of those businesses, they say, well, it's actually quite nice. It's a team thing. We're all off on Fridays. But some businesses close Wednesdays, some businesses close Mondays. I'm a big fan of, if you're going to close your business for a whole day, I'm a big fan of a Wednesday. Then you can always say, I've either had yesterday off or I've got tomorrow off. So the ability to work 2 days at a time and be very productive, knowing that you've got a gap in the middle, is really good for mental health. It's really good for people if you've got staff members who are struggling with physical or mental health. If you think about it, it is easier to work in blocks of 2 than even to try and get through, even if you're going to have Friday off, you've still got to get through all of those 4 days. Most people who have physical or mental health issues, really, if they're coming to work on Friday, it's a really unproductive day for them anyway, but that's because they've exhausted themselves through the week. So we encourage staff and organisations that if they have that, and we know in the UK 1 in 4 of our staff, our workforce, have a mental health or workplace stress-related illness, and so we know that 1 in 4 of our workforce are not working properly. So we encourage those sort of workplaces to look at a Wednesday.
Just in terms of a question to both of you, really, Charlotte, you mentioned initially about tracking productivity in order to measure success of trialling flex working. I think that's one of the biggest challenges that companies face, especially when you look at HR teams that are trying to implement a change in culture and policy. What are your tips or your tools that you would encourage an organisation to use in order to track productivity?
is ask your staff, get them to do it. If you hand it over to your staff and say, tell us how we can measure your productivity, they will find those ways.
We talk, I think I ask boards, I suppose, which workforce issues are really concerning them, because as you say, you can link flexibility to a whole load of different things, everything from, you know, diversity to obviously estate costs, through to productivity, through to engagement and so on, but I like to try and understand which workforce issues are really concerning them, you know. And over the last couple of years, gender and diversity has been one that's caused companies, you know, a reason to do this. Sometimes it is mental health and well-being, but kind of, yeah, from the kind of whole panoplia of measures that you could use, which things would you really like this to impact, and would you like to address? And then let's just focus in on those, because there's a lot of other things you could look at, but let's just pick, you know, if it's health or engagement, let's pick kind of the 2 or 3 that really matter to you and focus on those.
Yeah, I think that's really good advice, because it is often, you know, kind of, I think companies that have never done any form of flex, it can look slightly like navigating a mountain initially to start kind of small with something that they can measure is a really good shout. Thank you, Bo.
And there are all sorts of softwares you can use as well to measure productivity within an organisation. And for some people, some managers, a technology a solution is what they need. CFOs quite often like to have something they can truly measure down to the last dollar, and will often pay for something. But if you think about it, even something simple like Microsoft Analytics gives us a sense of what we want to do. Just make sure you take your staff along the journey. Don't end up like the little Barclays thing that happened earlier on, where they were quite innocently, because I happen to know some of the Sapiens people, quite innocently just trying to put in a project that they wanted to take their staff on a journey with, that they just mucked up entirely. And so I think it's really important, if you are going to put in tools that measure productivity in some sort of digital way other than counting widgets, you just really make sure you get the staff engagement about it first.
I think that's a really good point about engagement, and something actually your attitude towards it is really refreshing, because one of the biggest blockers that we are told about is managers' reluctance to change anything. And part of me thinks, we touched upon this on another session earlier today, but part of me thinks that it's not their fault. You know, we spent the last 100 years teaching managers to manage via presenteeism and via output, not outcome. But often there's that real fear factor, and we've heard of cases where flexible working requests have been refused. The manager's given the reason that HR won't allow it, and HR don't even know about it, which is quite sad. So I really like your kind of, you know, give it to managers, give it to them to own and really get them involved in it. Do you think that's to both of you really, do you think that's the best approach to kind of bring managers on board?
Absolutely. I mean, it's interesting because Microsoft actually have a person whose job it is to look at their flexible working. She's been in the job about 18 months now. And that was the thing that she found, is that while an organization like Microsoft that has had flexible working as part of what they do for, I don't know, 10 years, it is individual managers that determine whether flexible working is in their teams. Yeah. And if you've not got a manager that is interested in a reduced hour, flexible, remote, or whatever, any of the future of work things, because it's too hard for them to imagine how it will be, then it just doesn't happen in your team. And then what happens, of course, is an organisation spirals downwards. It becomes less flexible working, not more, because one team's not doing it, and then another one, then that manager leaves, and all these sort of things. And so at its heart, when we're talking, and I'm sure Claire does the same thing, this has to be a C-suite thing. The C-suite has to want this. And if you're lower than C-suite, you need to find a way to sell it to your C-suite, because if the C-suite in general doesn't support the idea, you will struggle for them to get the management, the people lower down, the team leaders, to come on board with it. And without them, you need to go there. And one of the things we often say, people say, well, what are some of the downsides of remote, of reduced hours working? And Claire, let me know if this is an experience that you find. One of the downsides is some of your managers will leave because they don't want to be measured in this way. It's too hard for them. They're not flexible and agile in their own thinking, and they just want to do things the way they have always wanted to do them. Now, that sounds sounds awful, but reality is these people don't fit your culture anymore. If your culture is shifting, you need, telling you guys, HR people, if your culture is shifting, you need to have people who are shifting with the culture along on the journey, and doing something like this highlights those gaps.
Yeah, I'd agree, but I'd also say I think we've got a job to help support managers with managing flexible workforce, because I think, you know, it is easier in the old sense that you were just sitting by your team and they were all in the office 9 to 5 alongside you Monday to Friday. That's understandably easier for some people than the idea they're going to be managing people. But you know, thanks to lockdown, we've all been forced into learning how to manage remotely, learning how to judge someone by outputs and so on. But I still think we need to support managers to understand, you know, some of the skills in that, to understand a bit more about flexible job design and, you know, the different models of flexibility that would work in their team, and, you know, and how they're going to have to maybe be a bit more proactive in managing the team, making the touch points, you know, all of which has payoff. But, you know, there is a bit of a job for us as HR practitioners to make sure managers know how to do some of this stuff.
Yeah.
Because sometimes the fear is just from, oh, it's a change from what I've, you know, my management approach has been so far, and I don't really know how to do it. We've also seen disincentives in policies, in things like finance policies, and sometimes things like sales targets and so on, which actually can disincentivize a manager. You know, they've got a number of sales hours, 3 from their team asked to reduce their hours. No one reduces the delivery, the outputs they've got to deliver, and they feel they've been sort of punished, if you like. They've lost some man hours for delivery, but they don't know how to do it. And again, you know, I'm sure Charlotte would be saying this if I didn't. The number of hours shouldn't equate to what you deliver. There will be other ways to do that, but managers feel in the short term it's a disincentive. You're taking away some of my ability to deliver. And that's not fair.
Which is why a really good design program, which is why a trial as well is really important. Yeah. You know, and you know, we often say, you know, if you want to bring in a 4-day week, or whatever reduced hours model that you want, don't say that you don't make it permanent right from the get-go. You run a trial, because how you will make it work in your organization with what your organization needs and what your people needs will look different from organization to organization. So as I said before, my 4-day week doesn't look like your 4-day week. And so it's about finding that. So back to Claire's thing, my flexible working in my organization doesn't look like flexible working in your organization, because I have the people working for me that I have, and I have their needs and their skill sets and the journey that I need to take them on. So finding your own, a trial for how we do this. Now, COVID, of course, has given us the ultimate trial. And so therefore it's about taking what we've learned from forcing everybody to go home, and what are the benefits of that. I mean, one of the disadvantages, of one of the things we're about to find out about in the UK, is what is productivity going to look like when we're working from home and the children are in school. Because of course that's one of the biggest issues. I find it hilarious. All the people prior to COVID, or most of the people prior to COVID, who were looking to have flexible working, of course, were parents. And they were like, yes, I want flexible working. I want to be able to work from home from sometimes. And then, of course, we said, yes, you can have flexible working, go home, but we're giving you the kids. And so by having the kids head off to school next week for the UK, and I think will be really great to see. Certainly in New Zealand and a lot of parts of Australia, where we're not in the big summer break, that is something that businesses have really seen, that ability for people to get work done without children in the house.
I'm longing for that day to come, bring on Thursday. Do we just kind of future gazing really at what the future might look like? Obviously we're talking about moving towards an outcome focused way of working, and certainly all the research that Cognizant and organisations like that have kind of spearheaded has looked towards the fact that the future, so Generation Z potentially, they want to align their values and their purposes with the organisation's values, and ultimately they want to be project based rather than role based. So this is what we need you to deliver. Do we foresee, either of you foresee, a world where there's no such thing as a 4-day week, there's no such thing as a 5-day week, there's just a job to be done and it's your responsibility to manage your time to deliver that job? So that might be a 2-day week, or that might be a 6-day week, or whatever that might look like. Have I gone too many steps ahead?
Oh, look, I mean, it would be a nirvana, I think, but the reality is not everybody wants to work like that. Not everybody has the ability, the self-discipline, a lot of people, you know, when they're in work and in larger workforces, they like the structure of coming to work. It suits them, it fits in with them. And so actually a large part of what we need to find is how do we have that, there needs to be flexibility about coming to work as well. So how do you find what's going to be right? And people will self-select the job roles based upon the types of, the way that they want to work. So I think there'll be a lot more choice in terms of how we work. The millennials are already making different choices around how they want to work. And you will be seeing that in your HR business experience. The young ones, she says, this middle-aged woman, they just want to work differently. They still want the safety of work. They want the safety of certainty of income, but they want to work for businesses that have values that align with their own values. They want to work for social enterprises. They want to work for companies that do more than just make a profit. So over time, the managers will be made up of these people. And then the C-suite will be made up of these people, and the place itself will change because our culture has changed and the people that are leading it have changed.
What about absolutely. And what about the interim then? So particularly in respect of frontline positions, roles that can't be done with flexibility in terms of location, how do we manage that sort of cultural transition that we all seem, you know, we've all been campaigning and working towards it for a long time, but for organisations who perhaps have found themselves in a position where this is the trial that they've had to do for no other reason than a pandemic, you know, their leadership is a little bit reluctant to continue it longer term, or they're looking at the business case. You know, Claire, what would your advice be to those types of businesses that may be watching now?
Yeah, I mean, I think it is what we've said a couple of times already, which is listen to staff and what they want. I think, you know, in lots of industries, we've got to learn from this period, because there are roles being done remotely that we never conceived could be done remotely. Everything from, you know, lawyers who are attached to their paper files and have had to find a way to work through, to teachers obviously working remotely, which has never been considered an option before. So I think there's a huge piece of learning to do from the last few months to understand and see where we can push harder on different types of ways of working and using the technology in a way we never had before to unlock more options. But then I think, you know, then it is really listening to staff, I think, as we go back to the office to understand what they want work to look like. And that's in every role. So yeah, not making it a two-tiered conversation, one for the office workers and one for the frontline workers, but making sure it's an inclusive conversation. And as I said, for frontline workers or those who need to work in a particular location, understanding how else we can offer them choice, control, a feeling of, you know, that they're trusted, they have ability to input into their roster, their schedule, and so on. So yes, I'm hoping in most cases that we won't just revert back to the world that was 6 months ago, because the workforce has changed so much through this period. And we've done a big trial on working from home, and most companies haven't suffered as a result of that. So yes, we're encouraging all our clients, just keep talking to people, keep understanding what they want the world of work to look like, what innovations we've tried through this period, what we want to keep going forward.
Yeah, your staff have all the answers on how they can create a different workforce for themselves. If we assume in a nirvana world that we're not doing jobs that we are entirely unsuited to, personality wise, so therefore frontline people are doing frontline jobs because they like the frontline, and so therefore if you take the frontline away from them, they don't want it, you know, it's not the job role that suits them. They like being customer facing, they like that engagement. And so a lot of the conversations that we're having now is around that. How do we maintain culture, and if we accept that flexible and remote working is going to be, particularly remote working, is going to be a large part of what we do. And most companies that are taking the pulse, and Claire, you may well have done research with some of your client companies, but most companies that take the pulse of their staff, between 70 and 85% of the staff don't want to go back to how it was before.
Yeah.
So that's a fairly large majority. So that's fine. So they want a combination. They either want to remain remote working completely, and that's a minority, but most of them want a combination of that. And then there are a few people who want to come back to, I want to go back to the office, please let me back. And some of that will be personality wise, and some of that will be just because they're just not set up at home properly. They're in a shared flat with, you know, 4 people trying to be on the internet in 3 rooms, all having Zoom meetings at the same time, and it's quite stressful for them to feel like they're doing what they need. And so again, some of that's going to come into how we manage this moving forward is, you know, what are the conversations that make it safe and the mental health aspect of it. One of the great things about being in, you know, in the office, of course, is that we can see our staff better, and we've got companies that have much better programs around understanding staff mental health. When you are seeing somebody sitting behind a Zoom, they've put their clothes on and they've got their makeup on or whatever, they've got themselves all sorted, and then the minute the screen goes off, they're falling apart because of whatever's happening at home or whatever's happening in the rest of their lives. We need different ways of coping with managing staff mental health, because if we're going to send them home and that impacts on their mental health, then we have some responsibility to be clear about that. And how we might manage that differently. So it adds layers of, just as much as it solves a lot of problems and creates new opportunities, it does also add in a few layers of other more tricky things that the C-suite needs to be mindful of. But when you do, the result is magic.
I think what we're talking
that's
about,
interesting actually. Sorry, Ursula.
what we're talking about ultimately is the personalisation of work, isn't it? And the future of work in which people can be themselves and can help an organisation, human, exactly, and help their organisation to be better because of what they bring. And you know, that ultimately is what all of this is about, isn't it? It's about making work really work for everyone, and will be different for everybody.
And back to your question, Ursula, where you were saying, you know, what do we do now? What are the, you know, if we can't have a whole organisation? If you understand that when Henry Ford introduced the 5-day work week into his organisation, it took him 3 years to get it across the whole organisation. So this is not something we need to do today. This is a journey for us to be on, so that we can find what is the best way of doing it. Because for businesses, the best way of doing it is actually going to end up being the most profitable way of doing it anyway. Yeah. If you can find that sweet spot as a business around having the best staff, and that's either you're a preferred employer, or the staff that you've got with you are in good physical and mental health space, they feel supported, they're in job roles within the workplace that really suit them, and they feel like they're working for a company that they really care to work for. When you get all of those things together, you end up with a workplace that just hums. Managers love managing it, staff like being there, and the C-suite guys have, you know, guys and girls, sorry, I use guys in a general unisex way, but the C-suite people are all, you know, they're all happy because what they're required to do is provide shareholder return, but they want to do it in a way that gives where the workforce is happy.
It's an exciting time, isn't it? And it's heartbreaking that it's taken this kind of event to propel these kind of discussions to the top of the agenda, but I am happy that they're happening. I think, we're all happy they're happening. And certainly it does provide a lot of optimism for people at work to have more opportunities to engage in more conversations, even where the culture doesn't perhaps support it long term at the moment. They can at least engage in a conversation about what the future of work might look like for their business.
Absolutely. And I mean, if we accept that, that these conversations were happening before, COVID has made them happen more rapidly, but
and in more businesses.
Absolutely. But there is no right, and this is not a political issue. This is not something that, okay, yeah, the left want, right? But the reality is that this works really well for business. It works really well. This is an apolitical idea. You don't necessarily, just because you want a future of work that doesn't look like the workforce of the 80s, 90s and the millennium, doesn't make you a lefty. It makes you just somebody that has a human heart that wants to also be fulfilled either at work or as a business owner.
And as the science is telling us, works better for individuals as well, in terms of what the science is telling us about how people work. And yeah, because I've been chatting through this time to the people who are night owls, or the people who are larks, and how they've been able to work when they're at their best. So again, it works for the business, works for individuals.
And emotionally, we like, I tell a story often where we're if you go to work and you have a day where you've got a whole pile done and you've got everything off your list and you feel like you've achieved something, and the boss says to you, that was great, thank you for your hard work today, and you go home and you say to your partner, how was your day? So I had a really good day. And then if you go to work for the same number of hours and nothing seems to get done, and you're in a whole pile of meetings that you didn't really need to be at, or you quite enjoyed them, but you still get to the end of the day and that report that you needed to have done by the end of the week is still on your desk. You go home, you say to your partner asks you, how was your day? You say, it was rubbish. So actually, so much of what we're talking about is actually, how do we create that, I've had a great day. And we as humans generally feel much better about ourselves if we've achieved something. So if we can go to work and achieve something that we feel matters while we're at work, then we always have a great day.
That's right there with the adage about making your bed in the morning, and you start the day feeling like you've ticked something off. I'm big on that school of thought.
Yeah, absolutely.
Drum it into my tiny daughters.
There's a lot that Jordan Peterson has to say that makes a lot of sense in some of that sort of space as well.
It all feeds into what we've been talking about this entire conversation, doesn't it, in terms of asking people what would give them that sense, what helps you to do your job in the best way possible, and how can we make that fit with what our business outcomes need to be. So it really isn't, when you kind of examine it in its minute detail, it isn't rocket science, is it? But I think it's about knowing where to start, and I think you've given some really, really incredible tips here that will be so valuable to our audience. So I can't thank you both enough for being so generous with your expertise and your wisdom today. And I know it's just going to be a great watch for everybody. So thank you so much for being here as well, Maddy. It was brilliant to co-host this session with you. And we will be answering questions as the session goes on and as the day goes on. So we'll look forward to hearing from you as the sessions develop, and we'd love to hear your thoughts. Thank you so much, everybody, and we'll see you on the next session.